Okay, it's right behind you.
Okay, everybody, thank you. It's 5:30, and we want to get started. So I'm going to ask Rusty Day to come up and do the introduction. Thank you all for being here for this very important meeting and learning as we go. Here we go. Here's Rusty.
Thank you all very much for coming out tonight. First thing I want to do is congratulate everyone on a very successful challenge grant. We put a challenge grant out through the generosity of several very generous donors. On October 28th, we challenged the community to raise approximately $15,000. The challenge grant was $25,000, 2 for 1. And we were hoping to raise $12,500 from the community. We raised $28,000. So thank you all very much. And we're so pleased and excited about that. We have another challenge grant for you, which I'm going to talk about at the end of the presentation. But the reason we're here tonight is to hear from 2 experts, one legal, one hydrogeologic. Our legal expert, many of you know, is Tom Nasco. Probably, if not the most prominent, certainly one of the most prominent and important environmental lawyers in the state, and indeed this part of the country. And we're very pleased that Tom is representing us. And he's here tonight to explain to you legally what's wrong with this application from Bishops Lodge. Why is this so problematic, and why you should be concerned about what's wrong with it. Because it doesn't just affect you, but it affects the way we're governed and how we're governed. The second speaker tonight is very pleased to have Phoebe Sweeney. She's the founder and director of High Water Consultants and a superb hydrogeologist. She's worked in this field for years. Is very knowledgeable about liquid waste disposal, as you'll see, and she's going to tell you why you should be concerned about this as a practical and a physical matter. Not the legal implications of what the lodge is doing, but what the practical implications are for you and your drinking water, for your groundwater, for the water we all depend on in this valley, and why this proposal by the lodge is of such concern. So with that, I'm going to get started, and I'm going to begin by introducing what Tom's going to talk about. I'm going to set the stage for what are we looking at here from Bishops Lodge. So what you have here is a topographical overview of the location of Bishops Lodge. And just to get you oriented, this is Bishops Lodge Road. This is the Little Tesuque Creek. This is Bishops Lodge, and these are the hills and villas. Bishops Lodge and the hills and villas own all of this land, all of this property, and they own it to the south of Tesuque Creek as well. And the hills and villas were developed when Bishops Lodge spun this land off and it was subdivided, and they've put in 83 condos and single-family dwellings up on these hills since about 2015. And there are 49 single-family residences up here and 34 condos on 3 separate tracts of land. So the question is, how is this community handling its waste, the liquid waste that it generates? There are over 1,000 people in this community. And what's their plan, and how did they decide they're going to handle this liquid waste? Well, you're going to find out, and I think we're going to discover in this process, there was no plan. They just got built. And sewer lines were put in, but they apparently were sewer lines to nowhere. And now what we are is they're going to dump that waste. That's the proposal, is to dump it. They're going to dump it in a creek, are they going to dump it? Next to the creek in a leach field. They're going to dump it, okay? So here's the plan. We're going to collect the sewage and wastewater from the lodge and those 83 separate properties that I talked about, up in the hills and the villas. Over 1,000 plus people. They're going to partially treat it at an on-site treatment plant that they've built. And then they're going to discharge up to 30,000 gallons per day into a single 2,000 square foot leach field. And that leach field is located right here, immediately adjacent to Little Tesuque Creek, in a flood zone, on 2,000 square feet, 2,500 square feet of property. So now what I'd like to do is ask Tom to come up and tell you, well, from a legal perspective, let's just talk about this from our state's regulatory process. Is there anything wrong with this proposal? And if so, what?
Thank you, Rusty. First, I'd like to thank all of you for the opportunity to work with you on this project. It's very exciting for me because I think we can do some good here. I'd like to thank Rusty, number one, for his invaluable research that he's done so far in this endeavor. It saved so much time and it's been invaluable. It's been very good. I tried to hire him. I tried to hire him as an associate, but he's just not interested. I don't know why. And Eric, too, thank you so much for all his work. Really, we wouldn't be where we are today in identifying at least the preliminary legal issues if it weren't for Rusty's research, and I want everyone to know that. It's not my research, but it was Rusty's research that really uncovered this and allowed me to explore it further. But first of all, we're going to talk about, I want to make sure everyone sees this. So in New Mexico, there are a couple of things you can do to get a permit to discharge wastes. The first thing is we have a ground and surface water protection regulations. And what these regulations do, it's really interesting. They don't really prevent pollution. They allow someone to pollute. And you can get what's called a discharge permit under these regulations. And typically that permit will require abatement of the pollution you're causing down the road. So it's really interesting. It's not preventative. It allows pollution, and that's simply what it does. And we look at the whole totality of the circumstances and see how much load we're putting into the aquifer or the stream bed. In this sense, it's the aquifer because it's groundwater. So just as a footnote here, when we're talking about discharging into groundwater, that's a state jurisdictional issue. Surface water is the feds. That's why we had EPA involved, Region 6, in the NPDES permit application that the Bishops Lodge ultimately abandoned. So that's where we are. But one thing we have to know here, and it's important for you to know, that this type of permit is generally reserved for industrial facilities. It's not reserved for liquid waste disposal activities because there's an entirely different set of regulations that apply to that. And this is the liquid waste disposal regulations. And no person can discharge effluent from a liquid waste treatment unit without first getting a permit under those regulations. Now, preliminarily, let me tell you, I believe that the application is proceeding under the former and not the latter. In other words, the application is proceeding under the ground and surface water protection regulations and not the liquid waste regulations. Because if it proceeded under the appropriate regulatory body, I don't think it could be granted. And that's what we're going to pursue further. All right, as I mentioned, the liquid waste disposal regulations, they're different in their terms of their purpose than the surface and groundwater protection regulations that industrial facilities have to be permitted under. The regulations in this instance are really designed to protect human health and the environment, not to abate it once the damage occurs, but to make sure the damage does not occur. In other words, you're not authorized to pollute under this set of regulations as you are under the discharge regulations for industrial facilities. Here, it is designed to prevent degradation of the environment. And here again, we've summarized here on this slide the difference in the definitional sections. The hazard to public health exists when water is reasonably expected to exceed one of these standards in what we call 3103. We call them the 3103 standards. And if you look up 3103, it's a numerical list of contaminants, 99.9% of which have nothing to do with a liquid waste disposal facility. And so long as you're discharging contaminants less than that particular standard, you get the permit. And even if you're exceeding the standards, you get the permit, you just have to abate. Now, the liquid waste disposal regs, on the other hand, mean any hazard to public health is defined quite differently. It's limited to, it's not limited to anything that's set forth in the water protection regulations, but anything that has the potential of adversely affecting human health. So we don't have numerical standards in the liquid waste disposal regulations, which I think this facility should be under. Does that make sense to everyone? So we're talking about two different animals here, okay? All right, so, and here are the requirements. They're really quite different, and they're quite clear. If you're falling under the liquid waste disposal regulations, you got some things you got to watch out for. Number one, it's got a liquid waste system is a treatment unit and disposal system, which Bishops Lodge is applying for, that serves a residential or commercial unit. Importantly, the total wastewater received by the system may not exceed 5,000 gallons per day. Now, Rusty just told you it's 30,000 gallons, right? So how do you do that? Well, what you do is you can have multiple 5,000 gallon per day disposal units, and you separate them based on siting requirements on the lot. The reason you do that, and Phoebe will explain this better than I can, but the reason you do that is you want to dilute the environmental effect. You don't want to pour everything down in one leach field. You want to have a variety of leach fields at different locations to minimize the adverse environmental impacts. Does it make sense? Makes sense, right? It's very commonsensical. Another requirement, though, which is extremely important here, is the 20.7.3.201 requirement, which says that the liquid waste system has to be located on the lot which generates the waste. So what does that do for all the villas and all the residential units that Bishops Lodge has agreed to take their waste and aggregate it into one system disposing of 30,000 gallons per day? Well, it runs afoul of this particular regulation. So, what did Bishops Lodge do? And again, this is Rusty's research, it's pretty good. What did they do when they were selling the villas? Well, they said, don't worry about it. We're going to connect you to our system. And we're going to dispose of your waste, not on your lot, as per the regulations, but on our lot. So these unsuspecting buyers of all these properties thought, well, that looks good to me. I don't have to deal with it. It just goes down to the so-called sewer system and into one aggregated disposal site. And I think Eric's going to mention some involvement of the villa lot owners later on in our presentation. But that was in their plat filed in the county records. So that was the representations to the buyers of these lots, that you don't have to comply with the regulations that apply to liquid waste disposal because we're going to take your waste. It's another problem. All right, as I mentioned, so here's what the regs say. Look, if you can dispose of more than 5,000 gallons per day. And by the way, I can tell you that the Environment Department at Bishops Lodge, the first thing they're going to say is, those regulations don't apply because we're disposing of more than 5,000 gallons per day. We're disposing of 30, so we're not subject to the liquid waste regulation requirements. Well, that's a paradoxical and contradictory statement, because what that says, in essence, is that the more waste you dispose of, the less regulatory oversight you have. That doesn't make any sense. And the regulations actually discuss this, so it's not jurisdictional. You don't get to catapult out of the liquid waste regulations and into the surface and groundwater regulations because you're disposing of more than 5,000 gallons per day. It says you can have multiple systems, as long as you meet the siting requirements and do the things that are environmentally necessary to ensure that there's no degradation as a result of your activities. And you have a setback. You got to be on the lot. So this notion that they're disposing of 30,000 gallons per day, even if they could accept the waste from the villa, which I don't think they can, but even if they could, well, they need 6 systems, not 1. So there we have it. I think initially those are the first avenues of contesting this application. And each system's got to be located in the lot. The scale of each permitted system is limited to 5,000 gallons per day or less. They have to be separation from each system with the appropriate setbacks. And the purpose of this is really quite simple, because New Mexico, northern New Mexico in particular, very rural, and we had to place responsibility on the individual lot owner to make sure they weren't putting things in their system that weren't allowed by the permit. Now, as we know, we don't know what people are putting in their systems from up in the villas, because there's no mechanism of enforcement. That's not their problem. It's out of sight, out of mind, right? It could be medical waste, it could be anything. It could be turpentine. We just don't know what it is. So the idea was each permit would be enforceable against the lot owner on which the system was located. Yeah, and I think at this point, I'd like to, Phoebe Swain is really, she's the one to discuss the environmental effects of why this is here, this hazard prevention, and why this is necessary for the liquid waste regulations, and why it's necessary that we do this, and the policy reasons behind it. So, Phoebe, may I have you come on up and speak? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Rusty. And just want to say good evening to everybody. My name's Phoebe Swina, and also thank you for the opportunity to support this community on this issue and in the protection of our natural resources and our water resources here in New Mexico. To that point is, we know that from a technical standpoint, a lot of our rules and regulations are based upon technical reasoning or rationale as to how they are developed. And there are reasons to why the rules and regulations have, in this case, set limits like 5,000 gallons per day. So my job is kind of straightforward, and I want to also thank Rusty and the others, community members here, for doing a lot of the research, a lot of the legwork. And so normally I would have to be going through all these files and trying to dig up the plats and the information. But what we're seeing from a technical standpoint is, as Mr. Nasco has walked us all through this process, it's very straightforward. So my job becomes that much easier of just demonstrating and providing the technical kind of stamp of approval or stamp of like, yes, this is a reason why 5,000 gallons per day is the limit. When you have concentrated any type of waste, any type of contaminant that is beyond what it is designed for, it increases the potential for further contamination beyond what it is designed for. For example, groundwater, right? So if there is a limit, that limit is imposed for or defined for a reason. So when we add more concentration, it enables or allows for migration, because the area or the leach field or the treatment is not designed, nor have we seen the leach field the ability to process the waste. And so then it just concentrates it more. and I'm learning a lot about this community, and I love to hear the stories of folks that have been here for generations and families, and also looking through some of the documents on the area, and so I'm learning a lot as well. But in general, what Mr. Nasco and Rusty shared is, you know, this is the layout of what we see. One thing that we don't see in this particular mapping is that the topography, right? So when things are higher, obviously, gravity does its work, right? We can't fight gravity. So a lot of this is above grade, and when we have, you know, rivers and streams, normally those are below grade. So everything goes and like gravity goes into those rivers and streams. So one thing to note too is that we do, this particular river and stream is one of those that is, I would say from a hydrology standpoint, one of those essential surface waters of New Mexico. You know, comes off the mountains. It's maybe doesn't flow all the time at high flow, but it is one of those essential, I like to call this, if anybody's seen some of my discussions, is like the back of your hand. You have a whole bunch of rivers and streams and veins that then go into your bigger blood vessels that are necessary for the whole ecosystem to be balanced and to have sustainability. So if one of those rivers and streams is impaired or affected by contamination, ultimately the whole system then, and for the community here to then be impacted, even on a surface as well as what is hard to see from the surface, but you can imagine is the groundwater landscape, right? So there's a whole interconnection between the surface waters and groundwater, which is the concern when you have, for example, here, a leach field that is so close in proximity to a surface water. And since I was in high school, I had the honor to work with the University of New Mexico. And so as a high school student, I was able to learn how rivers and streams breathe. That's how I explain it. Our rivers and streams breathe water. There's times of the day and times of the season when the river will give to the groundwater, and there's times of the day and times of the season when the groundwater will then give to the surface water. It's that breathing of a stream, it's that living of a body of water, and we see that throughout New Mexico. I was able to start to see it when I was in high school and looking at a number of rivers and streams throughout New Mexico, from Taos to the Zuni Mountains, to the Jemez Mountains, to the Santa Fe Mountains. So you can really see that interaction between the surface and groundwater. So even if we have a superficial, right, in a leach field, to then a groundwater, there is those in-depth and very complex interrelationships and interconnections. So that is why, again, the siting, as Mr. Nasco and as rules and regulations define, why there is the necessity for those sightings of leach field or potential points of contamination, whether it's simply BOD, nitrogen, or even other potential chemicals like pharmaceuticals, or maybe forever chemicals that, you know, we're just learning for about, like PFAS, that we didn't know what we didn't know 10, 20 years ago when we were all using, you know, coated cookware that then gets into the system, right? And so as I was talking here, we have that highly transmissive alluvial area, especially around rivers and streams. And that's, again, one of those reasons and rationale why you have your leach field sited away from a living body of water like a river and stream. Also, what we see throughout New Mexico and any river and stream is the groundwater, as I said, is very interconnected with the surface water. So you'll see shallow groundwater tables. So even if we have a leach field that's, you know, the the close proximity to groundwater, and then again that transmission to the surface water becomes almost like a direct pipeline, right, to the surface. And in this community, it's rural nature and its evolution over time is a lot of our community members here in Tesuque have local groundwater wells. And that is dependent upon that alluvial groundwater source. So if that alluvial groundwater bank or storage and source, like underground river that then feeds and is the resource for your drinking water, it is of utmost concern to make sure that that continues to stay as clean as possible for our children here, right? And all age groups, to have that clean water and able to ensure that we hydrate ourselves with clean water. Thank you. So again, what hazards, as I explained, is the very clear and straightforward interconnectivity between a leach field and the surface water, but as well as the groundwater. And this map, again, that Rusty and folks have created, it's very clear that there are other clear drinking water sources that are very close in proximity and may be directly affected by whatever gets inputted into a leach field. And again, this is a great graphic as well to demonstrate. As I said, on that one map, you couldn't see the terrain, but as we all know, if something's up here, gravity's gonna pull it down. So that's the other real, just straightforward analysis and reasonable conclusion when you have something going up, especially like if a groundwater input is put in, whoever is down below, you're getting your water from those wells that are down gradient from an input, it's gonna transmit and flow to your drinking water wells. So again, there's all of these really straightforward considerations that have to be addressed as this process goes forward. And again, this is just another great graphic, again by Mr. Rusty Day, that all of these drinking water wells, and this is just all public information. So from this location, all of this along the water source that we see on the surface are in direct kind of flow line, if I can use that term, to potential contamination migrating from the leach field. So again, the discussion by Mr. Nasco, and that's why the regulations and the adherence to and making sure that there is the safety considerations for surface as well as groundwater is extremely important in this process. So in a previous part of my career, I dealt with looking at how for our rural America, how we look at septic tanks. And one of the things that I was involved in was a project on how we look at tertiary and secondary treatment of liquid waste. So septic, they have it's anaerobic. It's what's called anaerobic treatment. So, septics are very much utilized nowadays. There's other up to tertiary treatment of liquid waste. But I can say, even looking back at what, as of this week, there is no real tertiary treatment that pulls out all the contaminants, like pharmaceuticals or PFAS. I mean, those are the real challenges today of our liquid waste in America, and even on wastewater treatment plants. So when we have a proposal still to do maybe secondary or tertiary, if that is, gets to be more and more strict for this developer, there still has to be that understanding that there are some contaminants and inputs into the system that we still can't treat for. So that is what would then potentially, if there is a leach field, go into the leach field and then potentially into the drinking water. So again, understanding that, and even on a secondary and tertiary treatment system, just from my work over the decades, is there's a lot of operation and maintenance. As to what Mr. Nasco was saying earlier, is the inputs to a system have to also be very well managed and regulated. And so when you have it out of sight, out of mind, how do you enforce that? And that is, again, why there's certain rules and regulations. I won't get too much into that, but more on the technical side is there is a reason why the that regulation has been established, so that it can ensure that the operations for on-site wastewater treatment, either septic or a secondary tertiary treatment, would operate efficiently, effectively, and up to what it needs to do. And even if it's that up to that, we still got to consider that there are contaminants, potential contaminants that are not treated. And again, this is just a great graphic just to understand that, you know, there's things that can be treated for and there's things that can't, even the technology that we have today. You know, and I work on stuff for some of our local Pueblo communities about Los Alamos, and that's the same thing. Even looking at some of the contaminants in our system, there's still contamination that we cannot treat for, and it is very expensive to treat for those contaminants. And so this graphic is a great graphic to demonstrate that it is not going to be comprehensive on its treatment. So we do have to be knowledgeable of what's going into the leach field, and there has to be some type of consideration for that. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to Rusty.
So I think both Tom and Phoebe are more than happy to answer questions. If anybody has questions.
Yes, but I want to get a concept by the rest of you in the room that do not derive water from the acequia. Our acequia that I'm on takes our water from around the school, goes all the way down to past the post office, Old Coach Road, all the way through this valley. The other acequias predominantly feed the upper part of our community. Should, in the future, this thing move forward, should theoretically they say, we can test for all these contaminants, should they put in a system to do that? Should those tests reveal contaminants in the river, I, as a commissioner, will have to shut down my acequia completely. And I'm assuming that every other commissioner will agree with me, because we cannot be liable for distributing that contamination through the valley and ultimately to the Pueblo neighbors who start at Old Coach Road. So I had a question for Rusty. The household owners of these casitas, should they not have some liability on this as well? I assume that this legality is just going towards Auberge, but I'm very interested in that. First part of the question. The second part of the question is, perhaps are they aware if there is a liability? There. Thank you.
John, I can do that.
I actually have the same question.
Yeah, let me just say that the Hills and Villas are victims in this as well. And it's super important that they have rights that are separate from this scenario. So I'm going to be, if you're from there, or you know someone for there, or you know the association there, have them contact me, because we're looking at an action on their behalf. Because in New Mexico, there's a tort, an injury suit called negligent misrepresentation. They didn't have to intend to mislead, but they negligently said, you're gonna hook up to our sewer system and you don't have to do on your lot. Someone gave them that advice. And it was represented to them, and they've been paying money and paying more money for a system, the system to nowhere at this point that Rusty mentions. So I believe as well, it's not that if this system takes off, yes, they could be with knowledge now that they are sending contaminants in violation of the regulations, and that could open them up to some liability or responsibility. But perhaps we can get ahead of the curve and tell them, you have the same interests as we do. Clean, environmentally positive disposal.
If each of these houses had its own septic tank and leach field system, would that resolve a lot of our problems? I know Bishop's
Can you
Lodge.
repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, is
If
each lot had its own septic system where you could test and know where the contaminants were coming from, would that absolve them?
or their own septic tank and their own leach field
Yeah.
per
Like we
house.
have.
On their
Like we
own
have.
property?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't want to turn this into a discussion about a different community than our community. But let me just say, one of the important aspects of all these questions is, this is why the liquid waste disposal regulations were adopted. Because the first provision in the regulations is each homeowner is responsible for the safe disposal of the waste they generate. You cannot escape your responsibility for the waste you generate. We all live under that regime. We are all individually responsible for the waste we generate on our property, and we are responsible to make sure that it's taken care of appropriately. This is an effort to end run and circumvent that. That's why it's important, as a matter of good governance, good politics in our community, that we see that the regulations that have been in effect for 20 years are enforced. And they aren't being. They're being gamed to our disadvantage and to the disadvantage of the homeowners up on top of the hill for the reasons we've talked about here. But who's getting the advantage of this? The lodge.
I understand that part of their discharge is also going to be put onto the land in the way of irrigation. Is any of this addressing that aspect of where this water is going, the treated water is going, not just in the leach field, but onto the land for irrigation?
Yeah, what they're doing to their property is not our concern. I understand. For 4 months out of the year, they want to use this water to irrigate their property. And, we can make every issue a matter of our concern, but the issue that we're focused on is how they are proposing to dispose of their waste in a leach field on Little Tesuque Creek for 8 months out of the year and what that's going to do.
I could speak loudly. I just would like to know, under the lawsuit that's being in front of the Environment Department, what is the remedy? So we are, I think, all convinced about the problem, but, we all live in the community, so what is the remedy?
That's a very good question. The remedy is to deny the permit. And if that's the remedy, that's the only remedy we can get from the Environment Department. And if the permit is denied, that means one of two things. They're either going to have to go back to the drawing board, the new permit application, or find an alternative means of disposal, as you suggested you do, or others do in the community. And part of that is transportation to an appropriate landfill for disposal. But the remedy is denial of the permit.
So where we are, I'm speaking now from the perspective of Protect Tesuque. We have 3 objectives. We wanted to stop their effort to dump this waste into the creek directly. Our second objective was to ensure that they adopt an environmentally sound solution to the waste problem they've created. As Tom outlined, they've created an enormous waste problem by circumventing these regulations. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. They want us to eat those chickens. Our third objective, and this is critically important, and you asked, are we going to be safe? No, we're not going to be safe, because this tells you what the incentives are and how you can game the system and how complicit our government is in the gaming of that system. So our third objective is to hold the county accountable. How did this ever happen? How did these lots get developed without on-site septic? How was this possible? And when are we going to hold our elected officials accountable to enforce the regulations that are already in place, not to mention improve them to protect the quality of our drinking water? So the remedy, as Tom said, for this particular action is to deny the permit, but that's not the end of our objectives for Protect Tesuque. We go beyond that. We want an environmentally sound solution up there. Denying the permit doesn't give us that. It just makes sure that they don't dump on us. And the third thing we want is to get the government to step up to its responsibility here to protect our interests.
So what if the permit is not denied? What's the contingency regarding that? And then second, is there any federal responsibility? It doesn't sound, there's got to be protections when it comes to the floodplain or riparian areas to build an infrastructure within that. So is there any federal responsibility regarding floodplains?
So I'm going to ask Tom to address the federal responsibility, but I'm going to talk about, so what's plan B? We lose. The permit gets granted. Well, I'm not going to disclose or anticipate, but there is a plan B, and we can deal with that. And Eric alluded to that in a sense when he talked about a cause of action on behalf of the residents up there for misrepresentation. The granting of this permit, particularly under these regulations, does not insulate them from liability for what they're doing. So there is a plan B, but hopefully we never have to get to that.
Yeah, as to the, and just a footnote to the first part, there's also, in addition to an action by the residents for trespass on your property because of the contaminants, there's also an appeal to the Water Quality Control Commission on if the permit were granted, which we would definitely want to pursue. As far as the floodplain issue, I do not know the intricacies of the FEMA regulations and how they affect this. My impression, though, is that it's a local issue, not a federal issue. However, if it's a FEMA type issue, I just don't know. I don't know the answer to that because I don't know. As part of the application process, that would have been one of the first things the Environment Department would have been required to do, is check all the boxes on floodplains, on compliance with federal law, on and on and on. So I have no idea what the independent federal law would be on that as far as FEMA is concerned.
I believe even within private land, there are still protections regarding floodplains and riparian areas.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. I just don't know what they are, but I do think you're right. Yeah, absolutely.
Does Bishops Lodge know what our war chest is? Like, do they know what?
Question is, does Bishops Lodge know what our war chest is? The answer is, I don't think they care.
Is there a chance that they're dumping right now? Other than the solid waste that they're trucking away, could they be dumping at this very moment?
The question is there a chance they're dumping right now other than their solid waste? Because, and the answer is, again, I don't know. I would think that would be highly reckless if they were. Whether their sludge piles have losses, I don't know. I've heard anecdotally that they do. So I'm not entirely sure of that. So is there a chance? That'd be risky business to do that.
One of the first things Tom did was serve public records requests on NMED, the Office of the State Engineer, and the county, so we can find out what they're doing and get an answer to this, because we don't know. Joanna?
And so my question will go to both you and to Phoebe. But something that I promised Eric, that I promised Ryan, that I would say to this group is that we will address our own waste. What I understand that's going on with the Tesuque Pueblo currently is that they are utilizing runoff water and treating it, and that's part of their water resource. And I think it's our obligation to make sure that none of us have faulty septic systems or have horse manure going into streams. We need to be conscious of our neighbors, because we're going to have to work together. We're under a new administration. We are going to have to work together as a community, because we have to rise up out of this. So, that's something I see. And my question for Phoebe is, I don't know what your knowledge is regarding but we can get some of those test results from what I understand. And what is your knowledge regarding what will happen with indigenous people if, under the Amat agreement, if there is a shortage of runoff water that they can treat and use for drinking water and use on the Pueblo, what will happen then? So that's one of my questions, because I understand that they have to go into that. Most of us are using the aquifer rather than runoff water, and Native people will need the aquifer if there comes a drought. So we have to be conscious of how we use water as well, because there are people that are not using the level of water that you're getting to your home. And then my question for the attorney is, if we're liable, if we have waste that we're producing that's already going and has been tested regularly since 1993, and I do think that Protect Tesuque should be working with the Tesuque Pueblo. They have so many incredible people there that could help us. And it's we must come forward, and we must also support and work as a community. They have great ideas, and I couldn't even bring it all to you. I think it's, someone should go from Protect Tesuque and represent. I did not represent Protect Tesuque, I went representing myself. What liability do we have with waste going currently going down through Bishops Lodge into the creeks? There's currently E. coli in there. And what will you say to Bishops Lodge when they say to you, I'm sure their lawyers are going to find out about this as well, that there's sewage in there, or that there's untreated stuff in there. So those are my two questions. Sure.
Thank you for that question. There's a lot packed in in that question. At first, I just want to always acknowledge, the Tesuque Pueblo and their sovereignty and their governance and their governor and tribal council, tribal leadership. I know, working a lot in the work that I do throughout New Mexico, as well as for a number of different pueblos, including Tesuque, I provide some environmental services to Tesuque on other projects. And just being a Pueblo person, understand the unique dependence and interdependence on surface water and the environmental elements that we depend upon just to be our way of life as Pueblo people. So I just want to all acknowledge that, but I also most want to make sure that the Pueblo speaks on its own behalf, and just reiterate that there probably will be a time when the interaction and engagement with the Pueblo will be supportive and helpful to the overall region and overall watershed. And then as to the Amat settlement and the details, the Amat settlement is very complex. And as we've learned over time, there's a lot of, with those complexities, there's a lot of evolution in how that Amat settlement gets implemented over time. So I wouldn't want to jump into a firm response to what that would be. I think that's a ongoing question, and it's something, like you said, collectively, it is in everybody's interest to work together. I try to promote that in all the work that I do, is collaboration and cooperation is extremely important. There's also, I mean, just make a quick I guess, plea for ongoing engagement. The state of New Mexico is doing what's called the Water Security Planning Act, and they're looking at different regions throughout New Mexico and how surface water and groundwater is going to be looked at for planning and prioritization and project development. So I would also encourage the community to keep an eye out for that. That's coming from the Interstate Stream Commission and OSC. And again, that's another way of collaborating and working together. I like what you shared about, not trying to villainize other community members and community folks here. It's about us all working. So I like that comment that you made about all of us working together. It is so important for our state to work together and to work collaboratively to address issues as we grow, as we have our homes from multiple generations back to Rusty is new from California into our community, and how we evolve and navigate all of that. And I think it's really important to think about that as we continue to move together as a whole through this process. So, and including our Pueblo nations that are our neighbors and also have a lot of knowledge, as well as indigenous knowledge, and also other levers, if you will, other ways of also advocacy. And so like I said, I'm sure when the Pueblo of Tesuque will be ready to engage, I think that might be another avenue. But I don't want to commit anybody, but just true full working together and engagement, especially with our neighbors of Tesuque Pueblo. Thank you.
In answer to the second question, the current state of the stream bed does not justify in any way, shape, or form the proposal of Bishops Lodge to compound the discharges into the aquifer underlying that river. So that's my answer to that. Secondly, are we, when you say we liable, well, I think as Rusty pointed out, the purpose of the liquid waste disposal regulations is to impose responsibility on each lot owner. So yes, you're responsible for the waste you generate and how you dispose of those wastes individually. So the we is too broad, but the question is, is there any way that an enforcement action of a violation of a permit could be brought against an individual because of E. coli being found at some location in the Tesuque River? The answer is probably no. It's not practical. So that issue doesn't concern me. But you do raise an overarching great point that you got to be responsible for what you do, whether it's horses or disposal system and all that. You got to take care of the issue yourself. But that doesn't concern me as far as Bishops Lodge. I mean, I would like them to raise that defense. There's some there already, therefore we get to add to it. That's a great defense. Like it. So bring it on if that's what they want to do.
I think we're going to have to wrap up, and unless there's any really pressing question, I think it's time to begin to close this down. I teased you at the beginning, promising to announce yet a new challenge grant, and I want to make that announcement. Yet again, several very generous donors have put together a $30,000 challenge grant. Again, it's a 2-for-1 match, but there's a twist. There's a difference in this challenge grant. You can't match it if you've made a prior donation. We're not looking to keep going back to the well and getting the same donors to contribute over and over again. We're looking to broaden the reach and the message. And I suspect that most everybody here tonight is a committed supporter. And I suspect that most everybody here tonight has already made a donation. Thank you very much. But this challenge grant is in fact directed at you. Even though we're not going to accept any further donations from you as a match, we'll take your money. We're just not going to credit you with a match. We'll take your money. But we've got another challenge for you. Our challenge is find us other donors. Talk to your friends. Talk to your neighbors. Spread the message about what's going on here and how important it is that they learn about this and they get engaged and they step up to chip in and help deal with this problem. So this challenge grant is in fact directed at all of you, even though you've previously donated and generously and graciously, and thank you very much. And yes, we will take more money from you. But to match this $30,000, the money needs to come from new donors. So we're looking to raise $15,000 by the end of the year. If we succeed, we think we have enough money. We hope we have enough money. It goes real fast. But we think we have enough money to get at least through or to the hearing that we need to put on with NMED. And it's critically important that we get that pool together. We get it together as soon as possible. We'd like to do it before the end of the year. So please do what you can to help us find new donors, to reach out and broaden the scope of involvement in the community.